Michael's study was, he wanted to look at capital funding and bringing corporate funding into family farming in agriculture.
Thanks, Murray. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start off by thanking GRDC for their continued funding of the Nuffield program, and Nuffield for giving me the opportunity to spend this year travelling. I'm sure it's something I would never have done had I not been given that opportunity. I'm from, as Murray alluded to, I'm from Western Australia, a grain grower from Bruce Rock, which is 250 kilometres east of Perth. We're in what would be called a medium to low rainfall area. That's some of the machinery we use for actually our farming operation in what we would call a medium to dry climate. When I came home from university in 1994, our farming operation was my father and mother, and we only had 2,000 hectares. Over the next 16 years, after I came home, between myself and my brothers, we built this up to just under 15,000 hectares by purchasing and renting land off farmers. This was all done through traditional bank financing methods. And from this, you can see over that time frame, from when I came home in 1994, where land values were and what we could produce on an average season, the margins were quite good. Over the last few years, there's been a massive change in the value of land. And I was looking at what ways we could address this issue. And you might ask, well, why has that happened when our productivity is only still down around here? And it's actually ourselves. We can blame ourselves for that by trying to spread our fixed costs over larger areas. So how are we going to address this beyond this point? And also, for farmers coming home from university, they're not going to have that opportunity that I had then. So when I was at the University of Illinois, I stated this to the Professor Bruce Sharrock, who's a professor in agricultural economics, and he told me a quote from Professor George Morrow in 1896, that was exactly the same statement that he made. So it's not new to agriculture, but more so to Western Australian agriculture. So my study topic was looking at corporate investment in agriculture and the potential investment for Australian farming families. So what is corporate farming? Corporate farming describes the business of agriculture and mega corporations involved in food production on a very large scale, and is often seen as the enemy of family farmers. It's been predominantly in intensive production. An example of that would be the Australian chicken meat industry, where we have two companies now that control 70% of the chicken meat industry. So why would corporate companies invest in Australian agriculture? Well, the financial returns. The returns out of America have been, over the last 50 years, 11.6% return. This includes capital growth, as compared to 11.8% return on the equity markets, with far less volatility. And food security is now becoming a major issue for countries, realising that they will not be able to feed their population in years to come. And examples of that would be Qatar-based companies that are buying land in Western Victoria and New South Wales to assure up food for their countries. And the current foreign ownership laws, Australia allows, it is because they allow investment into Australia. At $231 million before there's a lot of scrutiny into that, it is because they can. So before I go on, I'd just like to say I visited companies in Australia and around the world, but most of the companies that I visited, I had to sign confidentiality agreements as to their returns that they expected and what their motives were. So I looked at Paraway Pastoral, which is a derivative of Macquarie, and David Goodfellow, who enough people would know. They have 3 million acres under 3 million hectares under their management, 200,000 cattle and 200,000 sheep, and obviously looking at further expansion into other countries in row cropping. The AACL model, based in Western Australia, is another another form of investment where it's co-production of grain with farmers to take risk out of the variable costs that are associated with it. So out of the Australian models that I looked at, the AACL model was the one that really benefited family farming operations. The others were actually a threat to the ongoing increase in farm size. So then, these are the countries that I've travelled to around the world in my international study. I visited James Peck in the UK, and Velcourt was one of the main companies I looked at. This is based on a farm management model where they have internal R&D, and they were formed in the early 1970s. And they use their R&D as leverage to access land. And over the 30-year period, they took grain yields from 3 to 4 tonnes per hectare to 10 tonnes per hectare. Being a grain grower in Western Australia, we hear a lot about the Eastern European farming, so I wanted to see what was actually happening on the ground there. And via a 1996 UK scholar in Andrew Hunter, I was able to visit Hungary and Serbia and have a look at their operations. This actual operation, Europe Farming, wasn't his. That's based from Dutch money going into Eastern Europe. He was Magyar farming, and they had land in Hungary, Serbia, had some in Romania, and had been in the Ukraine. Some of the issues that I saw when I was in Eastern Europe were protecting the farming Serbia. That's actually me harvesting canola. Craig alluded to earlier, the small plots that are in Serbia become an issue because there's no fences of who actually owns what. This is how these companies are actually investing into Eastern Europe via the old state farms. Some countries you can purchase the land. Hungary is one you can't, but you can rent the land, and that's a system of aggregation of all these smaller properties. This is what was the situation pre-1990 and post-1990 after communism. What you'll see there is the state farm, and how much is there now government owned. But what you'll notice, the individual farming on the right-hand side, they actually aren't farming, they own it, but the corporates actually are farming most of it. Family farming isn't really something that's done in Eastern Europe. Another thing that was quite confronting to me when I was in Eastern Europe was I noticed there weren't many my age that were in the agricultural area. And being aware of what had happened in the early 1990s, I had a translator, a female translator with me, and she got quite emotional about the fact that in the early 90s that they lost 400,000 of their men that would have been my age involved in farming now. So I could see the huge potential that's in Eastern Europe, but politically and socially there's a long way to go. So I travelled to the US. Two of the major companies in the US are Hancock and Westchester. Between the two of them they have over $2 billion worth of land under their control. I spent over a week with Westchester, which is based 2.5 hours south of Chicago. They have land in Brazil, in the States and in Australia. They have permanent cropping and row cropping. Permanent cropping they manage themselves because they see the value in the permanent crops is in the actual crop itself, whereas in row cropping it's in the land, and any mistake in row cropping can be rectified within 1 year. I was fortunate enough to sit in on quite a few occasions where they were acquiring land, one of which was a $60 million purchase of a 15,000 acre farm in the Mississippi Delta, of which they're expanding a lot of their operations. They have a lot of land in the Midwest where it's traditionally the corn and soybean belt, and they have farmers literally knocking on their door asking them to purchase land so they can rent it. What I did notice is that I spent time with a lot of farmers who were involved with Westchester, and the desire for land is born a lot out of the fact that they have a risk insurance policy on production and price, which takes a lot of risk out of the downside of their industry. But the downside of this I see now, if it was in Australia, I've always thought that it would be a good tool. it actually elevates the price of land. A lot of the land in the Midwest is now up around $15,000 an acre and being rented for $500 an acre annually. So this is how I felt a bit after I left the States. Fairly flat on the models that I was looking at, how that could benefit a family farm. So I went into Canada, and there were two operations there. There was the One Earth farming, which had accessed a lot of the Indian reserve land, and they were just renting that land. And Broadacre, which was a derivative of the Pipe Management Group, and they were investing just totally on production. And these were two models that I could see that could be operated quite well in the Australian economy. So the influences I could see on corporates investing in with the legislation in different countries, and that's to do with taxation, as well as the programs like the price production, and the government programs, well, that's the direct subsidies on farming. And the attitude to selling the farm, an example of that would be when I was in Ireland. An acre of land in Ireland only changes hands once in every 400 years, whereas Australians have a totally different attitude and comes a commercial decision. But I'm not saying that Australians don't love to own land and are tied to the farm that they run. And the power and the strength of agriculture comes from the family farming unit. So where are we now? The land values in Australia have risen dramatically. The average age of this Australian farmer is over 53 now and rising. The demand for agricultural products is increasing, and food security is an issue for countries that realise they won't be able to feed themselves in the future. And the volatile financial markets are now making agriculture look like a market that they would like to be in with the security of it. So my recommendations to the industry are: farmers have different views on risk with their businesses and what comfort levels they are personally willing to operate under. There are a number of corporate structured models that can be used on it as an equity vehicle for farm expansion, and Westchester is one model. And investment in production, which would be AACL. Farmers can form management companies to operate corporate farming enterprises. With the increase in land values and the rental returns from farmland, there is now a willingness from farmers to share some risk with young farmers expanding their operation, especially those farmers that are wanting to get out but retain land ownership. And they would be through structured proportional rental and share farming. Or you can continue to use the traditional methods of financing operations and expansion via banking institutions. And there will always be a combination of the above. So finally, the determination and desire of professional of family farming today is unparalleled to any other industry. Farmers today are highly motivated, educated and positive about where the agricultural industry will sit around the globe and has historically. And agricultural production will be underpinned by the family farming in the future and will be the largest owner of agricultural land. I'd like to thank my Global Focus Group for the times we had when we travelled around the world and the experiences we shared. And I'd also like to thank my family for the time that I was away and how they managed, and also GRDC and Nuffield Australia. Thank you.
Do we have some time for some questions? Well, I'll start off. Michael, the farm next door comes up, the one that you've been eyeing off for a long time. What model would you be using after you studied to farm that land?
Well, I guess the easiest model at the moment is the Westchester model, which is based purely on them purchasing the land and renting it, and their rental returns they require 4%. Still, I see the problem with that is, I mean, I'm currently not in the market, but is that if you've got, for example, 10,000 acres and Westchester bought 20,000 acres alongside for you, the risk that puts the rest of your business on, because what's happened in recent years is our variable costs are now matching our fixed costs, and that puts a huge risk on our business with the volatility of seasons and grain pricing. So the model that I was looking at, and I can't really expand on with those Canadian models where they're interested in investing into the production side of the business.
Just wondering about whether you looked at any of the models, such as in New Zealand, of looking at equity partners, because it appears to me that in Australia, a lot of us are caught in a paradigm of you've got to own the land and the structures and control it, or you have corporatised farming where they're managing it. But did you look at any of the other models of looking at these equity relationships, as far as ownership of getting that economies of scale and efficiencies?
Yeah, it comes down to what return you want as a farmer and what risk you're prepared to take, and what you're going, because all models look at what you're willing to give up to the investor and the risk that's associated with it. So yeah, definitely look at those, and still working through what would be the most suitable model for farming in what would be more of a marginal area. Obviously, a lot of corporate money has traditionally gone into the safer growing areas, and the less secure areas have been somewhere where they haven't been that interested. Based mainly on the fact that you look at the capital growth in those areas.
Tim Hutchings, Michael, what impact does the Canadian crop insurance scheme have on the viability of those Canadian models?
Massive. They literally, from what I can see from it, they really can't go below the cost of their production. And on top of that, this year you would have seen, and Craig alluded to it, the number of hectares that weren't sown. On top of their price production risk scheme, they actually got subsidised for the land that wasn't sown as well. So the only downfall I see to that in the Australian model is the fact that it actually still would elevate land prices. But whether that would be over a long period of time or a short time frame, I'm not sure. But it definitely has a major impact on farmers' attitude towards risk. The other thing I'd like to say is the fact that a lot of people talk about marginal areas, but more than 50% of Australian production is actually out of those regions in Australia. So we need to look at ways in which they can remain viable.
Michael, you said that any form of finance is needed in agriculture. You know, we need it. Does that mean it's okay to have open slatting on foreign ownership?
I thought I'd be asked that. It was only the other day I was looking at what's happening with foreign ownership, and there hadn't been a study done on it, or the numbers done on it, since the mid-80s. And there was one that was only just released the other day, and that's saying that foreign ownership now is still only 11.5% of Australian land, of which 24% of that is in the Northern Territory. And then, in addition to that, which is not such an issue in the States, with water entitlement. And obviously Western Australia doesn't have a lot of water, but WA is the one area that foreign ownership of water is at 32%.
The problem with those stats, Michael, is that they're only measured over a very high platform. And so land has been aggregated under that platform. So I wouldn't take any comfort from that.
The other thing is, and the live cattle exporters in the Northern Territory have realised that the government are quite capable of making those decisions on stopping cattle trade or stopping foreign ownership. I think you'd have to realise what impact that would have on land values if you took out a portion of the market that was acquiring land, and the flow-on effect that would have with equity levels to farming businesses and their viability. So I think if there was any major impact on foreign ownership, there would be a major impact on the existing businesses in Australia.
Michael, what I take is the extension of that then, is that expensive land prices are good, and that shocks me coming from a young farmer.
Well, I don't mind the fact that my land's actually increased fourfold, but it's a matter of where you go from there. I think high land prices are fine. It comes down to, the issue really is production and how we're going to deal with the risk and the highs and lows and the things we actually don't have control over.
Emma Leonard. Michael, I was interested that you said you had to sign confidentiality agreements, which is possibly something new for Nuffield to have to deal with scholars not being able to really share their information fully. But my question is, I'm sure all these guys asked you about investing in Australia. What was your message back to them?
What was my message? My message is really look at the strength of what's been happening historically in Australia and the power of where the productions come from in the family farming unit. And before thinking of throwing money at corporate farming, look at how they could integrate family farming operations. The time I spent with Westchester, I was trying to instill into them that they need to look more at just at capital growth in land. And if we're going to feed 9 billion people, it's not going to be out of just owning the farm, it's actually out of what we can produce of it.
I think that's a very good point to finish on. I'd like to congratulate you, Michael, on completing the story.